In problem 10, we are looking to allocate the $20,000 of material handling cost. If you're allocating material handling costs, based on what we have, the best cost driver would be material handling time. So that's going to give you a activity rate of $62.50 per hour. So if we are then trying to allocate to the new skis, then you want to take your rate and multiply it by the actual. And so we used 170 material handling hours for the new skis. So that means we should give them $10,625 out of the $20,000 of overhead. 11 says setup cost for the two products amounted to $2,000. The company uses 1,200 labor hours to produce A, 2,000 labor hours to produce B. Both products require the same number of setups. They use a company-wide overhead rate to allocate overhead based on direct labor hours, based on this information. So what this is wanting you to do is to compare and contrast what happens. So if you look at this using direct labor hours, which is a company-wide rate, then you've got $2,000 of overhead, and you have 3,200 direct labor hours. So that's going to give you a rate of 0.625 per direct labor hour. So if we are looking at product A uses 1,200 direct labor hours at a rate of 62.5 cents. Then product A would get 750 of overhead costs if that's what we use to allocate. For product B, when we use direct labor hours to allocate, then that's going to give product B $1,250 of overhead. So this is the overhead allocation using direct labor hours, or using the company-wide overhead rate. But if we use ABC, then the total overhead cost of $2,000 of batch should be split 50-50, because it tells you that setup cost is $2,000. Remember that setup cost comes from running the batches. Okay, so number of batches and setup cost go together. So if the total setup cost is $2,000, and it tells you that they both require the same number of setups, then that means that the overhead should be split 50-50. So you should give $1,000 to A and $1,000 to B. So they should each receive $1,000. This would be correct. So for product A, if you use direct labor hours, then you have undercosted product A by $250, right? $1,000 is correct. $750 is what you would give it using direct labor hours. So there's your difference of $250. For product B, what's correct is $1,000. You would allocate to product B $1,250, so you gave it too much, so product B has been overcosted by $250. Next question. If substantial batch level or product level costs exist, meaning you have a large amount of product level costs, so that could be factory rent, factory utilities, maintenance on the machinery, those would be considered product level costs. And you then allocate that cost only using number of units, or only using a single volume such as direct labor hours, then what's going to happen is that you are typically going to overcost your high volume products, and you're going to undercost your low volume products. 13 says the cost of leasing office space from an advertising firm is an example of, and that would be a facility sustaining cost. Okay, so operating the factory or the facility, so leasing a space would be a facility sustaining cost. The only way to get rid of the lease would be to shut the advertising company down, so facility sustaining. 14 says, which is the following is a primary goal of process value analysis or activity-based costing, and the whole goal of ABC is to identify and eliminate activities that did not add value. 15 says, which of the following would probably be the most accurate measure of activity to use for allocating costs associated with the factory's purchasing department? If you read through these, the one that would make the most sense would be to use the number of purchase orders processed. Question 16, which of the following about ABC is not true? And your answer is going to be B. What is not true is that ABC is more likely to result in major differences from volume-based costing systems if the firm manufactures only one product rather than multiple. If they only produce one product, you don't necessarily need ABC. Question number 17, unit level cost drivers are most appropriate as an overhead assignment base when and several complex products are manufactured? No, if the products are very complex, then you need to use ABC. Only one product is manufactured? Then yes. If you're only making one product, then obviously all the overhead goes to that one product and you do not need activity-based costing. So that would make the most sense. We've got two different products. Each are assigned $50,000 in overhead by a volume-based costing system using direct labor hours as a cost driver. Okay, so we used only direct labor hours. We used a plant-wide rate, and it gave each of the products $50,000 in overhead. An activity analysis revealed, although production requirements are identical, product S5 is produced in significantly larger batches, thus requiring substantially fewer setups. So what that means is that product S5 is consuming less cost than CP8, okay? So by telling you that they produce larger batch sizes, meaning fewer setups, so fewer setup cost, so that means that S5 really uses less cost, and so it should be given less cost. CP8, on the other hand, consumes more of the cost and should be given more of the overhead. So it says compared to an activity-based costing system, CP8 will be, and the answer is under-costed because it's getting not enough cost. And then 19 says, according to an ABC system, S5 uses a disproportionately smaller amount of the batch level cost. If you don't use as many setups, it's not going to consume or use as much of the cost. Next couple of problems are going to use this same data. It's telling you these are your cost pools. So you've got supervision, machine maintenance, machine setups. You've got total overhead of $640,000. They're telling you what cost driver to use for each, and they're giving you the total activity level out of each of those cost drivers. And then they're telling you how much of that activity is used by this one particular job. And so it says assume direct labor hours are used as the activity in computing a plant-wide overhead rate. What would be the company's overhead rate? So if all we use is direct labor hours, then what would our rate be? So if you're looking at a plant-wide or company-wide rate, you just want to take the total overhead cost and divide it by the total number of whatever it tells you to use. So it says, what if we use direct labor hours? And the total number of direct labor hours is 800,000. So that's going to give you an overall company rate of 80 cents per direct labor hour. So it says using that plant-wide rate, what amount of that overhead cost would go to that one particular job? So if we're looking simply at the Littlefield job and we have a rate of 80 cents per direct labor hour, then we want to multiply that by the number of direct labor hours that were worked on the Littlefield job. So if it used 200, then that means we would give the Littlefield job only $160 of the overhead. 22 says, assume the company uses the 3 activity pools. Okay, so now we want to come up with the activity rates using ABC. So to come up with the activity rates for ABC, you're going to look at each one separately. Remember, to come up with the rate, it's just simply overhead divided by the cost driver. So if we're looking at supervision, we've got $320,000 of cost, $800,000 of direct labor hours. So that's going to give you a rate of 40 cents per direct labor hour. Okay, so $320,000 divided by 800,000 hours is going to give you a rate of 40 cents per direct labor hour. I'm going to do the same thing for machine maintenance. I'm going to take machine maintenance cost of 120,000, divide it by the machine hours of 960. So that's going to give you a rate of 12.5 cents per machine hour. And then the same thing for setup cost. You have $200,000 of setup, and you have 1,000 number of setups. So that means your rate is $200 per setup. So it's 40 cents, 12.5 cents, and then $200. So the answer choice that basically corresponds to what we calculated would be D. And then lastly says using the 3 activity cost pools to allocate overhead. What's the total overhead that needs to be allocated to Littlefield? So basically using ABC, how much cost will we give to the Littlefield job? So remember, to allocate overhead using ABC, you're just going to take the actual activity level and multiply it by the activity rate for each cost pool. So for the Littlefield job, for direct labor hours, they use 200. The rate is 40 cents per direct labor hour, so we're going to give it $80 of overhead out of that pool. For machine hours, Littlefield job used 1,600 machine hours. Your rate out of the maintenance is 12.5 cents. So that's going to give you $200 of overhead. And then for number of setups, your rate is $200 per setup. So that's going to give you $200 of overhead out of that cost pool. So the total overhead that's allocated would be the 80 plus 200 plus 200. So that would give you a total of 480. So your answer down here would be B.